Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast on the back of a chaotic, must be said, Detroit Grand Prix. Whole squad is back together to review IndyCar's first race in downtown Detroit since 1991. New circuit, new challenge. What do you think of the circuit and what do we think of the race?
Well, I think heading into it there were a lot of question marks. Would it be like Nashville? And the race kind of had a period where it was quite quiet, and I thought, oh my word, are we going to get through this without having a caution apart from the very, very early one? But in the end, it did end up being quite chaotic. We had a couple of crashes under caution, which was quite interesting. I think more than anything, the track was just incredibly bumpy, and where it was sometimes narrow, but there was just a massive long straight that took up sort of like almost half of the lap. But yeah, it was an interesting one, and it was definitely an action-packed race.
Yeah, I think Nashville was a very, very common comparison throughout the weekend. Very narrow in some places, like one car wide narrow, very, very bumpy, very long flat out sections of racetrack. Very comparable to Nashville, kind of in the city centre. And the race at periods was very similar to Nashville, and I think that's kind of the word of the weekend coming into it. Is it going to be like Nashville? And I think it did mostly turn out to be like that. It was a bit less chaotic than Nashville usually is, but still a very, very chaotic circuit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was a period, I think it was somewhere in the middle of the race, maybe lap 43 to 56, where there was no full green flag lap running, which was it got a bit broken up in that phase. And poor Alex Palou, who we will come on to, was extending to some pretty large leads and then just kept getting them wiped away. But to his credit, he managed all of the restarts very well and just kept managing to build his lead back up, and it was very dominant from him.
Yeah, I think when the cautions did come out, they kind of came at a convenient time to everyone, so there was no real mix-up in strategy, and the result order stayed pretty much consistent all the way out. Chaotic, definitely punishing for mistakes, but it was a decent race. I wouldn't say it's the best one we've had this season, but I don't think it was the worst. Absolutely, whole new challenge, and that was particularly prominent through practice and qualifying. We're seeing mistake after mistake. Obviously mistakes in the race as well, but not as significant. But definitely a challenging circuit for the drivers to get themselves into, especially with the bumps and the tight walls and that extremely long straight, which provided pretty much the only overtaking opportunity on the circuit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned practice, because a lot of the drivers were complaining that going into qualifying, they had barely had any clean laps because there was always a driver, or even in some cases a couple of drivers, just going straight on into the runoff and then either having to spin turn under yellow flags, or there were a hell of a lot of red flags as well across practice, especially second practice, which was only a 45-minute session. It felt like there was a red flag every couple of minutes. So yeah, it was a chaotic build-up, but actually given how broken up practice was, the race for a long while was surprisingly clean compared to that. But it did, as we've already mentioned, descend into the sort of chaos that we did see in practice.
And for me, looking at that circuit layout, for me, that is just not it for me. Especially looking at how it was driven with all the bumps and stuff like that. The roads themselves not really being in incredible condition. I feel like possibly they need to think about maybe a different layout, or maybe widening some of the corners, because like as we saw in practice, qualifying, and race itself, there were a lot of like very small mistakes that ended up leading drivers into the wall. And I think that's something that they really need to rethink to maybe make this Grand Prix a little bit more, a little bit less chaotic and a little less carnage everywhere.
Yeah, it looked quite physically taxing actually because of the bumps. I know Lundgaard after first practice was complaining that his hips were hurting, and I think after the race, which ended up being fairly long, it must have taken its toll, because especially coming down that really long straight, you do see the cars just properly moving about with all of the bumps. Obviously, with it being a street course, it's not like they can go and relay it, because it's, at the end of the day, it's downtown Detroit. So yeah, I don't really know what the solution is. I don't think it was the most exciting of tracks in terms of overtaking action, but it certainly had, a lot of jeopardy. I think we saw in qualifying a few drivers hitting the wall. I think Canapino in practice as well. Lundgaard, Kirkwood. I don't know what corner it was, but there was one particular corner causing all sorts of issues.
Yeah, turn 7, I think it was. On like a minute straight.
Yeah, but Kirkwood ripped his front left off, I think, in qualifying. You had Lundgaard bent his suspension as well. Yeah, it was really it was a real test for the drivers, and it kind of showed the quality that some of them have and the skill to get around that place without, coming to blows with a wall or something.
And I think it's about time we do touch on Alex Palou, because very, very impressive performance from the Spaniard again. And despite restart after restart, the victory never really looked in doubt from my end.
Yeah, I think this story started in qualifying, really, when he was 0.3 clear of Scott McLaughlin, who was on the front row with him, which is a remarkable time difference across a lap that was just over 1 minute long. He was 0.6 clear of 4th place as well. And you don't usually see that sort of margin in IndyCar, but as I did mention briefly earlier, I think during the race it was just so impressive that he could constantly sort of build gaps regardless of being pegged back by yellow flags and cautions and having to sort of conduct restarts. But he did that perfectly, and he is the form driver by a country mile at the moment, and his championship lead, which is now over 50 points, reflects that, and he very much looks a favourite.
Yeah, I think the only time that he wasn't ahead, I'm pretty sure, was around the pit stops when he had to go in. But other than that, he was always ahead, and he was always pulling away by multiple seconds. And he kept on in time as well.
Yeah, I think I tend to say power got him one of the restarts. But other than that, I think obviously power had the tyre advantage. Palou did look dominant, and I think the most impressive thing was that first stint. Obviously, Power, O'Ward, and Rosenqvist, who on the black, started further down, but he was pulling, I think it was pulled a 10-second gap before his first stop, which is pretty remarkable on a circuit of that type. It almost reminds me of Herta at the first race in Nashville, where he was just so far clear of anyone else in the field that it just looked never. Well, Herta didn't win, obviously, but it's kind of the ones that he just never looked in doubt.
Yeah, I mean, Palou it didn't look in doubt. He never looked like even making a mistake. I think he is driving so consistently within races and now between races as well. Obviously, he won the Indy GP, and that was by a massive margin. And you never know, without all of the cautions, it could have been a similar margin this time. But yeah, it was a great performance, and I mean, he could have won the 500 as well. We never know what would have happened if it wasn't for the VK incident.
As you say, with a 50-point gap now, it's so hard to bet against Alex Palou, particularly when a certain Pato O'Ward has yet another incident through desperation, it seems.
Yeah, we have spoken before about his the necessity that is a change of approach for him, but he didn't really look like he approached it any differently. I know it was kind of induced by having an issue in the pit stop, which pegged him back, put him down a lap before he actually repassed Alex Palou. But it was just, again, it was a sense of desperation. He was a bit impatient. He was never going to make the corner, and if it wasn't for some heads-up driving from Santino Ferrucci, would you believe it, then he could have taken Ferrucci with him as well. It was a stupid incident, really.
I think Ferrucci did very well as well to avoid I think they touched slightly, but he did very well to avoid a bigger crash and to also spin off and go into a wall, especially with the corner that it was on. I think it was really tight, I think.
Yeah, I mean, whether Pato's fault or not, the crashes he has had so far this season, he has had 3 incidents that have been born out of desperation that have cost him big points, really. And he's still, I don't know where he is in the championship. He's still
Fifth.
up there. He's 5th. Okay, so he's still up there in the top 5, but the points margin to Palou is significant for anyone really at the moment. O'Ward is. He could be in the mix. He's had the pace to be in the mix, but he just keeps making these. I don't know whether to call them mistakes or misjudgments, or as I said, it's just a case of impatience, really. It seems.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't helped obviously in the pit stop phase by McLaren, and that's what put him at the back. And obviously, from then on, he was never going to pick up big points. But then, kind of the cycle of the cautions near the end of the strategy risks. That he could have taken. There's nothing to say he couldn't have finished top 15, maybe even top 10. And I just think we spoke about this last week. What approach would he take after the Indy incident? Would he be, okay, I need to take a step back, I need to think about this championship long term, or would it be, I've had enough, I'm just going to go for it, it's all or nothing? And he's obviously taken the second approach again and made yet another rash decision on this occasion. And obviously, you don't know what's going to happen out in the course of a race, but particularly at the circuit that they were at, in the scenario he was in, he could have thrown away a top 10. You never quite know.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's an apt time to mention Kyle Kirkwood, who on the first lap had Callum Ilott's car riding the rear wing and taking the rear wing off his car. Has to come in and replace the rear wing. However, managed to recover and finish 6th, which is a mighty impressive drive. And I think Kirkwood this season, I know obviously he got the win at Long Beach, but he's just quietly getting on with his business. He's had some unlucky moments. He had the crash at the 500, which whether he was in contention or not remains to be seen, but it robbed him of a very good finish there. And I've been really impressed with him. I think obviously we'll come on to Grosjean as well, but Kirkwood has arguably been the most impressive Andretti driver. I think definitely comparable with Grosjean. Yeah,
I think probably it is time to touch on Grosjean. A retirement, which at the time looked like a mistake, but it's come out since that it was a suspension failure of some kind due to a bump. Whatever it is, it's the 4th retirement in 7 races for Grosjean, which is really disappointing for him.
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen bits of Grosjean's radio during the race, and he wasn't happy with something. I think it was the rear left, maybe. Whether enforced or not, it's another crash. I think is that 4 now this season.
4, yes. So
7 races. He was running in the top 10, I'm pretty sure, or on track for the top 10 in all of those.
Yeah,
he's had the pace.
Yeah, St. Petersburg, he lost the win. Admittedly, that wasn't his fault on that occasion, but it's still a victory lost. He lost a top 5 in Texas, a top 10 in Indy, kind of a top 6 today. So, again, it's disappointing to actually, believe it or not, he's actually behind Herta now in the standings. And after Alabama, we were saying he's probably been the standout performer of the season so far, but his season's very quickly gone downhill.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite astonishing. I think overall it was just a bit of a messy race for him. I don't think he made many friends at Team Penske. He had some contact with Scott McLaughlin after he was coming out of the pits. McLaughlin was obviously on hot tyres coming down. They kind of just met. I don't know who you frame it as their fault. Could McLaughlin have backed out? Could Grosjean have exited the pits a bit more safely? It was a difficult one, but then I think there was some contact with Newgarden as well for Grosjean.
And he went off at turn 8, didn't he? I can't remember who was battling.
Yes. That was. I think he was under pressure from McLaughlin, and he went straight on. He did. To be fair, he executed a pretty impressive spin turn that meant he didn't lose masses of position. So he was still running up towards the top 10. But yeah, a few too many errors coming from him. And maybe a bit of aggro too. Scott McLaughlin liked to tweet saying, I sense your patience with old mate Roman is wearing thin. That guy cannot race clean. Hard luck today. So that's an interesting plot line.
Yes, I mean, was it the third time they've come to blows this season after St. Pete in Alabama?
They always just seem to find each other on track somehow. But yeah, racing can sever relationships, and I think they were fairly good friends. A few moments now this season, they've come to blows, or at least been battling pretty intensely.
Yeah, I think Grosjean now is the point in his IndyCar career where he's got to stop making this mistake. He doesn't quite have the. Well, it was a rookie a long time ago, but he doesn't quite have the rookie, the new to the team excuse anymore. And he's shown what he's capable of. He's just got to be more consistent. And obviously today, it wasn't his fault supposedly, but he still has made a couple of mistakes.
Yeah, and he can't afford that.
He responded to a Twitter he posted on Twitter just being like suspension failure. I guess the car wasn't made for our track. And then someone responded being like the other way around, and then he clapped back and just been like, sorry to disappoint, but the rear right failed before the contact. And then he was like, it's always so easy to comment from the sofa than it is to like race. So I don't know, like I feel like a lot of people must have said something to him. Well, not a lot, but like quite a few people must have said something for him to have kind of clapped back like that.
Yeah, I feel like tensions are running a bit high actually, because McLaren replied or quote tweeted a couple of tweets from Saudi Gazeta. One of them saying, "Clobber people and serve up a bunch of attitude. Whine like a wounded puppy when people race you the way you race them. Hashtag unprofessional." McLaren responded saying, "Enjoy the couch, mate, and keep bashing the keyboard." And then it continued as well. Yeah, round two. Lack of a denial is duly noted. I'm actually in a chair, and it's a screen, not a keyboard. Much as bashing a keyboard is reasonably considered preferable to bashing race cars. And McLaren said, "I've duly noted your duly note." So all sorts of fun and games going on.
I think it's time we give a bit of a mention to Will Power. He hasn't had the best start to the season, but he was very impressive today, actually, I've got to say. Yeah,
it was a good job from Will Power. He where did he qualify? Seventh. So it was a decent qualifying spot, but he really made up places quickly. He was on the alternative strategy, was he? And just managed to keep those tyres alive, and
executed
just started
very well.
Yeah, he started picking up places like pretty promptly and closed the gap to Palou as well, and he kind of brought the fight to him a few times on the caution restarts, but obviously Palou was kind of just the imperious driver yesterday. But yeah, I think Power was a very strong performance.
Yeah, I think the alternate strategy is probably actually the better strategy, dare I say it. It's proved by Power and McLaren's. Obviously, there's always going to be that risk of the caution, which means the alternates are safer, but both Power and the McLaren's actually did very well, and Power always looked like he'd have a chance at Palou. Obviously we said Palou was in control, but Power was always looking feisty in the restarts, and he made some pretty good moves. I think one of them was on Rossi towards the end of the race, and just kind of says a bit of a struggle for Will Power, but a much more encouraging race for the defending champ.
Yeah, and he had a bit of a super fan there as well.
Yes, I think it's time to touch on that. What's his name?
Flav. We should know this. Apparently he's American, but us Brits don't seem to be aware of this guy, but he seems like an absolute legend. And surprisingly to us, he's 64 years old. He did not look like he was 64 years old, but he was a very bubbly character. And there was a funny moment. I think maybe during qualifying when he did an interview with Kevin Lee.
Yes.
Maybe it was qualifying. Yeah, he was having a great time. Yeah, he was having a brilliant time, and he was a celebrity that actually seemed to know a lot of stuff about racing. He was mentioning watching Mario Andretti, Alan. So, unlike some celebrities who will just come to races because they get the offer because of sponsors or whatever, he seems to be having a great time, and he became a massive Will Power fan.
Yeah, it was really fun to see, like especially with that rap that he did in qualifying. That was a little bit cringy for me, but it was kind of funny. But yeah, it was really kind of refreshing to see like a celebrity guest that seemed genuinely into everything that was going on, and he was like a genuine fan, and that was really cool to see. And it's Flava Flav, so it's someone that you don't really expect to like IndyCar, but yeah, it was really cool to see.
I feel like there could be a lot of debate though with like the influencers and people going, because I was speaking to a friend about this, and whilst I understand why people will be frustrated, because it's happening in F1 as well, why like influencers are going and no one's know what's going on, but then also you've got to see it from like the business perspective and be like, well, if they come, then you have access to their fans and all of them, and whilst it would be great to have like influencers and that will go and that are generally interested in it, you're more likely to get more people into it if their audience isn't like F1 related, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's particularly prevalent with IndyCar, I think, because they want more exposure. The series can still grow and has a long way to go to reach the heights of, say, F1. But that's a big point you make, actually, that it goes two ways, and that at the end of the day, if they get an offer as well, it's not like they're going to really turn it down, even if they don't know much about the sport. But yeah, it gives exposure to the sport. That's a very good point.
Yeah, I think it was actually a really welcome addition, because not only was he entertaining, I was actually really rooting for Will Power victory, because the rumor was he'd be in victory lane with Will Power. Didn't quite happen. But he was entertaining. He clearly knew about the sport. And he was just happy to be there, which I think it was the most refreshing thing to see. He was just like any of us. He was just a really excited fan, but just a lot more people seem to know him, and he's much more talented at rapping than all of us, I'd imagine.
Yeah, but it was nice. It was just sort of unbridled joy at being there, watching the race. It was certainly refreshing.
Yeah, I think really, really good success for IndyCar there, bringing him in. You never know, might get more celebrities on there. But what I do like about IndyCar is when we do see these characters, it is people who seem to have an interest in the sport, which is, and they get them involved. So whether that's driving the pace car or being broadcasted or getting the two-seater ride, IndyCar gets them involved, which I think is really good compared to other series.
Didn't he like join the drivers' parade or something?
Yes.
Yeah, he was on Will Power's. Car.
Got to support it, I guess.
Let's hope we get more on the paddock soon and more raps like Kevin Lee on the TOP. I think it would be a welcome addition. Three up the podium over the weekend was Felix Rosenqvist. Bit of an inter-team McLaren rivalry, though.
Yeah, there was late on in the race was where him and Alexander Rossi really sort of made contact. But I think there was a bit of wheel banging earlier there.
Yes, there was.
The McLarens are it's incredible how evenly matched they all seem to be. They all seem to always be in tandem on track, really. It's a bit like the McLaughlin-Grosjean thing. They all seem to always find each other. But yeah, late on in the race, there was some proper sort of feisty battling between Rosenqvist and Rossi, and Rossi ended up making sort of slight contact with the wall. I don't think it'll be something that becomes too serious an issue at the end of the day. They're fighting late in the race to try and get on the podium, get points, especially for Rosenqvist as well, who, there's that uncertainty about his contract. So any sort of headline result like this he can get, he'll benefit from it. It was his first podium in about a year, I think. So it's a boost for him. But yeah, it was interesting to see the McLarens battling like that.
I'd like to see that even though they are teammates, on track, they don't see each other as that, they just see each other as competition. Where in other series, they won't go and fight them because they're teammates. But it'd be very stressful though if he was watching from the McLaren garage and all that. But it was very nice to see.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, in other motorsports, it would probably be team orders come into play and then say let your teammate by. So yeah, it was nice to see. Probably not. It wasn't nice to see for McLaren themselves, probably, but as a fan, it's good to see teammates fighting and it's no team orders involved. No letting each other by. It was
Yeah, I think in IndyCar, particularly where you have different strategy for each team, so they have their own strategists and their own spotters. Obviously, McLaren probably have a chief strategist somewhere, but they have their own little teams, which I think is why they are allowed to battle each other. And I think someone like Rosenqvist is really nice to see in battle because at the end of the day, he's fighting for his career. It's looking increasingly unlikely his future career is going to be at McLaren, but he's got teams out there he's got to impress. And with performances like that, I think, yeah, again, he was impressive. And I think, although the results don't quite show for it, it's been a much improved season for Rosenqvist. And maybe we can maybe see a couple more podiums, maybe even a win further down the line this season.
Yeah, I think he's at least definitely justifying that he needs to have a seat at one of the top teams. I think it was good to see him getting his elbows out and, you know, battling hard, even if it was his teammate. It was a really strong weekend from him.
Yeah, quite possibly his best one at Arrow McLaren. Obviously, he got the podium last year in Toronto, but he's done it yet again on the streets this time in Detroit. And who's to say he can't do better? And I've got to say, all the McLarens have actually performed really well this year. Obviously, O'Ward we have touched on, but on the whole, his performances overall have been improved. Although the race results don't quite show for that, they have been improved. Rossi's actually been very consistent. He's finished in the top 5 4 times this season, 7 races. And 2 of them, well, I know, one error in Long Beach, just that mechanical failure in Texas, where I had the incident with Kirkwood. And even Rosenqvist has been pretty consistent this year. He's obviously had his moments in Indy, Texas, for example, but they've all performed pretty strongly this season. And when you're looking at someone like Alex Palou coming in next year, it's hard to kind of look against McLaren for the championship in the next few years.
Yeah, Rossi's 6th in the championship, which actually we've spoken a bit about. Oh, we'll give him time to bed in, but actually he's bedded in really quickly with 4 top 5s, as you say. That's impressive. He's adapted very quickly, especially considering, as we've spoken about previously, it's a whole new car being added to McLaren. But yeah, I think Rossi, he's 6th in the championship. He could be better off if he didn't have that suspension failure at Long Beach, the unfortunate incident that wasn't really his fault at Texas. Yeah, it's been really strong, and he could easily be the lead McLaren car in the championship, barring a few things. But obviously, Pato O'Ward, for instance, has also had his fair share of bits of bad luck or mistakes that have prevented bigger points hauls.
Yeah, and a lot of consistency has been shown this season. Another one I want to touch on, Scott Dixon. Very quiet day, but he ended up 4th, and he's finished in the top 7 every race apart from Long Beach this year, which obviously he was probably going to finish in the top 7 if it wasn't for the incident with O'Ward. So again, Dixon getting the job done, and in classic Scott Dixon fashion, he hasn't really set the world alight, but I won't say he's in the championship fight, but he's making his name known in that area.
Yeah, I mean, it's not been flashy, but finished 4th. He's 4th in the championship. You know, he's just plugging away, getting results. So yeah, he's not much more to say than that. He's been quiet, but he's been consistent.
I think special mention should also go to Marcus Armstrong, who had a pretty impressive weekend. So he was fastest in his group in Q1. Pretty unfortunate to not get through into the fast 6. But he finished 8th, beat his team at Ericsson on pace, and all weekend actually he looked pretty strong.
Yeah, he showed some real pace throughout the qualifying sessions. As you say, he was unfortunate not to get into the fast 6 because he could have been battling for those front couple of rows really. But in the race, I think did he finish 8th in the end.
Yeah.
Maybe I think he was a bit disappointed with that actually, but he had the pace, and as a rookie, he's still very early into his IndyCar career. Obviously, having missed the 2 oval races so far, he's bedded in really quickly, and yeah, he's comfortably leading the Rookie of the Year standings despite having those 2 less races.
Yeah, and actually, he seems to be talking about now doing oval races in the future. He was talking about in before practice or something like that, where he said that watching the Indy 500 from the pit, he kind of regretted it a little bit, and he's like, he might actually be doing oval if there's an oval later this year. I think he said he might be doing it, so that I'll be interested to see how he does there.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good experience doing those couple of short ovals, 3 races, of course, with the 2 in Iowa. Just ahead of maybe then going onto the super speedways, it might be nice for him to sort of get into the groove on ovals with the short ovals ahead of Texas next year if he does end up getting an oval deal.
Yeah, that's what Grosjean did in his rookie year, and He actually performed quite well in his rookie debut in Gateway, and neither Iowa or Gateway are too taxing. I don't think they're not the hardest ones in the world to learn. As you said, Sato's not in contract anymore. So I think it'd be good for Armstrong. I think maybe something like the Indy 500 and maybe even Texas is a super speedway. It's a leap into the dark, but I think Iowa and Gateway could be a very good learning curve for him.
Yeah, I think it will have been useful for him as much as, he will have wanted to be on track at the 500. It will have been useful just being there, being able to watch how it works out, having never been there before, seeing the procedures the teams go through, being there, watching Sato, obviously. I think it will have been a good experience for him, and hopefully next year, especially if he continues this form on the road and street courses, then they might end up giving him the oval deal as well.
Yeah, I think I want to touch on one other rookie. We all know it is Canapino Watch. Probably, I'd say, his best weekend in IndyCar so far.
Yeah, he had that incident in practice where he hit the wall, which was a shame, but he bounced back from that. He qualified 20th, but again, that's still pretty solid, given how technical this circuit is and how early in his rookie career, it still is. And really, throughout the race, he was running just outside the top 10.
Battling
he did get a penalty.
Yes.
Yeah, he did get a penalty for blocking on Herta. What was that penalty?
There were two incidents of Herta. I think first of all we need to touch on last week, where we did mention the other incident with Malukas. We didn't actually see it. Since then, we have seen it where Canapino was ahead of Malukas in turn 2. He kind of got turn 1, sorry, and he kind of got slightly high, and basically just chopped across Malukas into turn 2. It's pretty dangerous, to be honest. And then this week, down the back straight, he kind of blocked Herta off when he was trying to go to the inside. Then there was another incident with Herta, which wasn't penalised, where he gave him a car's width, but he squeezed him a little bit. And the penalty he got was definitely deserved on this occasion. But although his result isn't his best so far, I think the pace was definitely encouraging. So for a rookie on such a technical course, and I think we forget this guy, this is still his 7th single-seater race. And he said there's not many street tracks in Argentina. He's still got little single-seater experience. He's up here fighting with regular IndyCar race winners for the fringes of the top 10. So I'd say comfortably his best weekend so far.
Yeah, and I think these little blocking moves are nothing other than rookie errors, really. Maybe miscommunication with his spotter, for instance. Because Herta did end up getting a bit of front wing damage from one of them. So, and he ended Malukas' race in the 500 as well with it was clearly unintentional. It's not malicious. He doesn't seem like that sort of ultra aggressive driver. But yeah, he finished 14th in the end, somewhere around there.
Yeah, finished 14th.
Well, yeah. So what was the penalty? Was it a time? What I
don't know what it was in the end. Actually, I think he had to go behind. I think he had to let Herta pass.
Oh, right. Okay. Was that
soon after? I think that was it. But that was it. So he went wide towards the end of the race at the hairpin. He lost a whole bunch of positions. I don't think it was televised. But that's how he kind of ended up 14th from kind of the 11th range.
Okay.
But I think the pace is definitely there. And as I said, for someone in the Juncos, which bear in mind, isn't the greatest machinery in the world, for someone with such little street circuit and single seat experience, again, really encouraging for Canapino. And I do want to touch on this briefly. I think compared to Ilott, especially in recent races, he's actually been particularly impressive. Obviously, Ilott's Indy wasn't quite representative, and obviously the positions ended up being quite different. Especially in recent races, maybe something's happened to Ilott, but Canapino's been matching, if not even slightly ahead of Ilott on occasion.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a mismatch in qualifying. Ilott was actually quite close to transferring into the Fast 12. I think it was. I've just got it here. It's about 0.6 between them, as far as I can tell, in qualifying. But yeah, he hasn't been that far. He's often been sort of in and around where Ilott is during the races. He's not been blown away by his teammate by any means. And this is Ilott, a guy who is being suggested to be a possibility to move to one of the bigger teams if a seat does come free. So yeah, really impressive from Canapino.
I can't tell if Callum has had if it's bad luck or if it's mistakes on his behalf, because the Indy 500 that he had to change the car, that kind of wasn't his fault. But then with with him going out in, was it the first turn, I think it was. So I'm like, could that have been avoided, or was that a bad luck? I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, it was tricky. It was a tricky one because it was kind of the field all checked up. He was coming in maybe slightly too hot, but by the time the field had checked up a lot, he couldn't really scrub off enough speed to avoid going into Kirkwood. So it probably was his error. It was a bit of a misjudgment going in too hot, but I don't think it was a it was a calamitous error in the end in terms of his race, but it wasn't like a huge error. It was sort of a small misjudgment with pretty big consequences for the race.
So obviously we had quite a lot of caution. So lap one we've kind of touched on. We had a waved off start. Then we had Ilott ramming to the back of Kirkwood. Then after then, it was actually fairly quiet for a long period of time. And I think the next one, am I right in saying, was O'Ward?
Yes, I think you're right. And then straight after Awards, we had it was quite unclear what had happened, but I think it was just because Stingray Rob went into the runoff and had to be refired. I think that was all it was. But it was a bit bizarre because Ferrucci was a lap down, but towards the front of the field, and he ended up peeling into the pit lane and just going straight through the pits. I assumed to just get out of the way, but I think Lundgaard was also in the runoff. I don't know. It was just a bit chaotic, that restart, but that was an almost instant caution.
Yeah, what we haven't touched on the Award one was Graham Rahal just crashing by himself during the caution. He just had horrific understeer and just could not make the corner.
Yeah, it was bizarre because he was soaring at the wheel to try and get it turned, and the car just wouldn't turn. It didn't even look like he was really carrying any great speed, but a dreadful period for Rahal just keeps on going. He qualified plumb last, and crashing under caution is quite humiliating, really. And then poor Benjamin Pedersen went straight into him because he was unsighted, didn't realise Rahal was there, and presumably just got a bit spooked and ended up hitting Rahal. And Pedersen did continue in the end, but I think he had to have some repairs done before he got back out on track.
I was going to say, I'm surprised more people didn't kind of wham into the back of Rahal. Was it Rahal? Yeah, because it was the point of the corner where if you didn't know exactly where it was happening, you could easily have gone slightly wide, or if you wasn't going right at the apex, and you could have just. I was just surprised that more people didn't have close calls to that.
Yeah, I think the use of spotters though definitely helps in that sort of scenario. Obviously, we know not all drivers actually use spotters, but yeah, that's definitely something to bear in mind on that incident there.
Yeah, that was where there was a sort of collection of of cautions within a sort of around a 14-lap period. But it was after that Power managed to get past Palou. I think it was probably the only time he actually managed to get in front of him from one of the restarts. But Palou had a bit of a gearbox. Something happened with his gearbox on that restart, which maybe contributed to it. But that was thankfully resolved because it would have been incredibly harsh if he wasn't to win that race, really. It didn't really look like anyone else was really in his league.
Yeah, I think the next one was Grosjean having his attempt we touched on. Then Malukas kind of randomly found himself in the wall on the restart.
Yeah, I feel like that was still under caution as well. It was a little bit before they actually restarted. It was another strange crash under caution. I don't know what was happening, about whether they were losing tyre temperature really quickly, or it was another just bizarre incident. Malukas he obviously finished 4th in Texas, but he's not had quite the standout start to the season. He's actually 23rd in the championship. Oh no, never mind. That's 19th. The result. That's the race results. Never mind. He's 19th in the championship. I was wondering why he was behind Rob.
That crash was really weird because he wasn't going that fast. So yeah, that's where I'm thinking maybe it was simply just tire temperature, or
it was very similar to Rahal's.
Yeah, it was it was just a very lazy, like slow turn, and then the car just wouldn't bite into the corner, and it just seemed like straight into the wall.
Then we soon had, I think it was the final caution, was it a Robin Ferrucci incident, I think?
Yeah, so we saw Rob in the runoff initially, and then the camera panned to Ferrucci, and it turns out Ferrucci pretty much locked up and shoved Rob into the runoff. Yeah, I don't think it was Ferrucci's finest moment.
I think we do touch on that last restart where it got a bit manic into, say, turn 1, it was actually turn 3, when Dixon locked up, hit power, and then Rossi went from 5th to 2nd in one corner.
It was 3 of the easiest places he has probably ever gained in his IndyCar career. But at the end of the day, actually, it didn't really impact the result that much because Power ended up back in 2nd, Rossi
5th.
Where did Rossi drop to? 5th. So yeah, it didn't really change anything.
No, not at all.
I think he would have finished ahead though if it wasn't for that slight contact with Rosenquist.
Yeah, he was degrading pretty quickly though towards the end. Maybe. Well, was that when Dixon got past him? I think it was, wasn't it?
So
it
was only
might have lost out
slight,
there.
but it was only slight, but I think because he had to I don't know, he had to correct it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, what was it? Herta's wing, front wing, was it that came off in the track?
Yeah,
It wasn't in the racing line. Off? Yeah, there was part of it.
Hit the barrier somewhere, didn't he?
Yeah, like half of it came off. It was a clumsy one. Herta started quite far down the field. Actually, he had his own contact with the wall in qualifying. So he did a good recovery job, but it kind of just all unravelled really.
I do quickly want to touch on 100 Days to Indy. This little clip kind of broke out 2 to 3 weeks ago. It was before Indy, but it wasn't really the appropriate time to bring it up. But it was actually about the O'Ward Dixon incident at Long Beach. It was actually quite an interesting interaction because the cameras were kind of hidden, so it wasn't one made for the cameras. But it was actually quite a heated discussion between O'Ward and Dixon. Dixon was pretty furious at O'Ward and said, "That's how you want to race. That's how we're going to race." And then O'Ward kind of said, "I'm not apologising for that. It wasn't my fault." So we kind of touched on the Ericsson war of words last week, but it's becoming evidently clear he's got drama with more CGR drivers.
Yeah, it was the incident was one where it's hard to tell whose fault it was really. There was a gap for Pato. I think ultimately he probably made the move a bit late. I don't think the way he was speaking to Dixon, he wasn't really taking any accountability. And maybe in his mind, he did go for a gap that was there, and at the end of the day the gap was there. But yeah, it was surprisingly heated, and it definitely feeds into this sort of rivalry that Pato seems to be forging with some of the Chip Ganassi drivers.
I don't think O'Ward. I think what is it? I don't know about last year, but I know this year with the Indy 500 and with this, I don't know if he can take accountability sometimes because I don't know how to describe it. Obviously, he could be yeah, well, I thought it was there. Sorry. But I don't think he would ever just be that was completely my fault. It's because with the Indy 500, it was, whilst there was a slight gap, he never kind of owned up to saying maybe I went for the gap and it wasn't there. He kind of blamed it all on Ericsson. So I feel unless he was the one to cause something and it was obvious that he caused it, I don't think he would ever take slight accountability.
What do you think about this, Dan, as a Pato fan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a point that has been raised to me a couple of times, and although I will hand on heart say that I think Indianapolis is opportunistic, but it wasn't his fault. I think maybe it comes with inexperience. We do forget, even though he has been around for 5 years now, he still is only 24 years old, and he still is an experience. So I think maybe in the heat of the moment where he does get frustrated, these things do come out from him. I think I don't know if you guys noticed, but in his race interview, he was very nonchalant. He was kind of yeah, this is why I crashed onto next week. It wasn't very. Obviously, I don't know what goes on in his personal life, but in front of the media, he seems a bit. I don't want to say arrogant, but he kind of gives off that vibe sometimes. I think maybe he needs to, because I don't want to say he's losing fans, but he's becoming unpopular with some people. That's never the attitude you want.
Yeah, and he's definitely starting to become unpopular with a couple of the drivers as well. And I think it feeds into what we spoke about with his approach, is that he really needs to just sort of dial it back a little bit, just because his reputation is starting to suffer a little bit. And maybe he doesn't care about his reputation. If this is the way he wants to race, then I don't know. He just has to change something, because he can't keep making that sort of mistake and not really seeming to acknowledge it. Maybe behind the scenes he is acknowledging it, and they are maybe working on it. But yeah, there is a bit of a lack of acknowledgement for his part in these incidents, I feel.
I know that you mentioned before, Dan, that he's had like quite a clean season, or like a clean career. So maybe it's just the fact that he's not used to kind of getting in these, so he doesn't know how to go about it, I guess.
Yeah, I said before 2023, it's hard to name an incident in IndyCar where O'Ward was at fault at all, really. And whatever's happened this year, it's up for debate, but it just seems more and more desperation is creeping in, and you could blame it on the championship fight, but he's been in exactly the same scenario before, so it's really difficult to say. But the next 5 rounds of the season are going to be game changing. The Road America's a circuit he's gone up pretty well, almost got his first win there. Mid Ohio again hasn't gone great, but it's gone pretty well there. Toronto hasn't gone well up typically, and Iowa's he was very good last year. So crucial 5 rounds for him. And will the approach change? He looked fairly calm at the start of the race, and he looked on for a podium. But whether him seeing that gap increasing to Palou is going to worry him a bit. Maybe it's going to make him go even more. I've got nothing to lose now. It's all or nothing. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial few rounds for the championship as well. I think this momentum that Palou has is a serious thing. I think that if his competitors are sort of serious about getting into this championship fight and remaining intact with him, they have to stop this momentum soon, as soon as possible, because he is absolutely flying at the moment. He just looks like he can't be stopped without any. If there's no issue that is out of his control, he just seems like he's completely bulletproof at the moment. Really, you look at the gap back to second, which is still Marcus Ericsson. Is 51 points, and then to Newgarden in third, it's 70.
Yeah, and I think it's
That's
hard
a big
to
margin.
see. It's also hard to see who's going to challenge him, because I think from all of us here, it's not going to be Marcus Ericsson. Newgarden, we'll say if he could pick up a run of form, but the thing about Joseph Newgarden's almost his entire IndyCar career is probably one thing he's never been good at, is getting a run of form together and having that consistency. And then look at other names. Scott Dixon maybe doesn't quite have the raw pace Palou does. Pato O'Ward, if he can keep it on the road, maybe. And then looking down, Scott McLaughlin, he's picked up runs of form before, but they're so far behind already that it's not gonna be a Palou is a bad race thing and it all changes. It's gonna have to be the entire summer break almost.
Yeah, I think I personally see Newgarden as the biggest threat to him, but as you say, it's whether Newgarden can pick up form. I think I'd actually like to quickly touch on Newgarden's weekend, because it was a week full of media commitments after the Indy 500. It must have been, pretty exhausting for him to then come to the track on Friday after, I think he only managed to get in the simulator, they said, on Wednesday. I think Juan Pablo Montoya was the last person to win a race immediately after winning the 500. And since then, the best finish has been 6th. So for Newgarden to finish, he finished 10th in the end. That's actually pretty solid. He qualified 5th, which, again, that is considering the sort of mentally draining week, as much as obviously he will have been relishing all of the festivities surrounding winning the 500. It's exhausting, and he seemed that he carried more momentum in than it being much of a hangover, and he's probably still riding that wave. I think if he doesn't win the championship this year, I mean, I'm sure he would take it that he's won a 500 any day of the week. But yeah, I was actually quite impressed with his weekend. I think he maybe had a slow stop at one point as well, which pegged him back a little bit, but he didn't seem to have the pace of the leaders. But it was a solid effort, given the tiring week he will have had.
Back to the fight for the championship. I feel like maybe it would be the case of not just like one person, but kind of taking it race by race. So like whichever tracks another driver will be more confident on or better on, then they'll go ahead, maybe like win it, and then it'll maybe knock Palou down a little bit, and then like it'll be like another race. I don't think it'll be like just one person. I think it'll be kind of a collective kind of effort.
Yeah, I've got to say, Road America is going to be a huge one because Road America is arguably Palou's best track. Won in 21, was okay, he obviously retired early on last year, but he was qualified well and actually got his first podium here, and that was in a Dale Coyne car. And he's strong, but on the flip side, Joseph Newgarden is also very, very strong at Road America. He won here last year. He should have won here in 2021 until he had come the engine issue with a couple of laps to go, which let Palou pass. Looking back, pole in 2020, third in 19, first in 18, second in 2017, and that's when it came 8th the year before that, which is the first times on the schedule. But he's strong here, and both Newgarden and Palou, it's debatably one of their best circuits. So it's going to be a really big race for the championship, I reckon, as Road America.
Yeah, and actually something on Palou as well. Going back to qualifying, this was the first time in his IndyCar career that he's got back-to-back poles, and he had only got one going into the 500. So he got his second pole of his IndyCar career at the 500, backs it up with his third. So yeah, he's showing form in all departments, which it's worrying for the rest of the field.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that it's not going to be at this team next year either. And who's going to be the man to fill the shoes of Alex Palou is a big old question.
I actually want to quickly talk about what we were talking about just like before. For the championship, in my opinion, I think it's a bit done. To be honest, I don't see anyone challenging Palou at all. I think he's just so precise and consistent. Like you said, we're coming out to Road America, which is one of his best tracks. I genuinely don't see anyone challenging him. The fight for P2, I think, is very much on. But yeah, I don't really see if anyone can dethrone him, basically.
Yeah, I think it'll take a major incident or two for Palou to kind of drop out of that position. It just looks like nothing can really stop him at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we still do have 10 races to go. And in 2021, Palou's championship almost came apart in 2 races when he had an engine failure at Indy and then got crushed out at Gateway. And I kind of look at that run between Iowa and Gateway. Palou hasn't typically been strong on ovals, particularly short ones. So his best finish on a short oval is 6th, which he achieved in Iowa last year. It's going to be a big weekend for him, Iowa. Nashville, it's Nashville. Who knows what's going to happen? Followed by IMS and Gateway, again, another short oval. So I think that stretch is going to be really big for Palou, and I don't think with the series, you can't count it out until it's mathematically over. And we do know that, yes, he's got the advantage, but there is still a long way to go. We've only just hit a third of the way through the season. So
yeah, I think the Iowa doubleheader and Gateway they could be decisive if Newgarden stays in touch, because who is the master on these short ovals? It's Joseph Newgarden, and he, with no disrespect to Ericsson, Newgarden is the guy who I see as lurking mostly, in the shadows of Palou. Although, I mean, he's not really in the shadows given the lead that Palou's got, which by the way is so impressive given how competitive the series is. To have a 51-point lead after 7 races is it's just pretty astonishing actually, and it's real credit to the consistency he's shown and especially his form in the recent few races.
So obviously, Joseph Newgarden, we kind of mentioned his media commitments over between Indy and obviously touched on what it's going to do for the championship. But his media commitments have come in a different form.
Yes.
In some cases.
Yes, absolutely. So he tweeted just asking for people to send in their videos of the celebrations when he went into the stands. Obviously, being in the UK, it's quite difficult, about 4,000 miles away. But I had a picture of myself that I took during the jubilation of Newgarden winning the 500 with the TV in the background when Newgarden was going into the stands. So I replied to this tweet saying, from nearly 4,000 miles away, lo and behold, Newgarden likes it. And he didn't like any other responses, which I take great pride from. But that's not as far as it goes as well. Scott McLaughlin quote tweeted one of my tweets during the practice week of the 500, which for me personally as a McLaughlin fan is quite something. I tweeted just saying how nice it was to see, how excited he was on the broadcast after, I can't remember what day, it might have been Fast Friday possibly, but he was just in awe of the speeds around the track, and that came through in his interview where he was just joyous after stepping out of the car. So I responded to say how good that was to see, and he quote tweeted my tweet saying, "Living the dream, dude." So there we go. We've got some dive bomb connections with the Team Penske guys, and I also got a response off the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on race day, which was something as well.
Oh, yeah.
So
Twitter
there
famous.
we go. Twitter famous, the DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast.
So almost there. We're going to wrap up this Detroit weekend. New circuit, new challenge. How do we rate the circuit overall? Do you prefer the old Belle Isle circuit? What do you think?
It's hard to tell, really. I think, personally, I would give this circuit another year. Maybe they'll make some minor amendments if they can. Obviously, they're restricted by the fact it's a street circuit. I think the chaos wasn't quite as large as I thought it would be. Obviously, there were periods of the race that were quite broken up, but it wasn't the most spectacular race ever. But it was still there was a lot of action, and Nashville stayed on the calendar, and last year's Nashville was also chaotic, but equally that sort of race every now and again can be quite, it can be entertaining.
Yeah, I've got to say, a lot of people obviously love the old Detroit circuit, the old streets of Belle Isle, and some people missed it. I think characteristics-wise, it is very similar to Nashville. I don't think Belle Isle have really had an equivalent in the calendar. Obviously, we'll give it time, and maybe they might improve it slightly for next year. To see, obviously, but an interesting change to the calendar. And I think one which is always going to be a race to look forward to, like sort of how we, with anticipation, look forward to Nashville every year, because we know it's going to be a fun race, but not for kind of the reasons we want it to be fun.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Palou was kind of an expected winner, but it's a sort of race that is quite nice every now and again because there is the threat of, or a threat. It's a nice threat of having an unexpected winner or a first-time winner, which you always like to see. So for that reason, I think, yeah, it's good. You've only got a couple of those, really. Obviously, St. Pete this year was similarly sort of chaotic, but Nashville, Detroit, it's quite nice to have a couple of races like that.
There we are, another dramatic week of IndyCar, another week of lots to talk about. Next race is going to be Road America in 2 weeks' time. But don't worry, we will have an episode next week, and our episode next week features a very special guest. So stay tuned. Thanks to our team for joining me again for another really enjoyable episode of the podcast, and hopefully us, as well as a special guest, we'll see you next week. We'll see you then.